All right. The Civil War, of course, is a whole story unto itself, but we're going to jump over that for now and leap into 1865, where the Civil War has ended. A mere 1 year later, here we are at the 100th anniversary of Reverend Strawbridge crossing over the river and founding the Methodist Church up in Leesburg. At this point in time, his parish reports that the Methodist Episcopal Church on the whole had 929,259 members altogether. Not just here, of course, but the whole church itself. The Methodist Episcopal Church South had approximately half that at 525,000 total. So we've got the 100th anniversary. They wanted to do something to commemorate it. And I wanted to quote Miss Parrish in her history. She says, "The 100 years celebration was by construction of many churches. Numerous colleges were established to supplement the work which had been founded." So they're trying to get over the Civil War, but they are also looking towards the future and wanting to commemorate the founding of their history. So around this time, Bill pointed out, the Methodist Episcopal Church abolitionists had stopped meeting at Liberty Meeting House. They split apart and they went to Jefferson Schoolhouse. The Methodist Episcopals did, left the folks at the South at Drainsville at Liberty Meeting House. Their first minister at the Jefferson Schoolhouse was Reverend A.J. Porter. She goes into great detail about how wonderful he was. He had such a great desire to help the local people who were still suffering. I mean, the war is over, but not really. I mean, the devastation went on and affected them for many, many years, obviously. So he traveled around the countryside to acquaint himself with all the people, all their problems, to try to help them, to console them, to give them ideas for what to do and how to get through the years of recovery. He started holding revivals at Jefferson Schoolhouse, which was sorely needed. This was something to look forward to. It helped them get over the heartaches of the war. His assistant, and we'll hear a little more about him a little bit later, was John Forsyth Jr. He entered the war, he got wounded, he came home and recuperated, but then he re-entered the war and stayed there till it was over. And he, after that, went into the Methodist Episcopal, that's a mouthful, Methodist Episcopal ministry. And so Reverend Porter took him under his wing and gave him the work to do with, quote, war-torn souls for a better spiritual life. So he was a great assistant for Reverend Porter, and they worked together to try to help the countryside recover. The Northern churches in 1872 made an overture to the Methodist Episcopal Church South. Let's try reuniting. The South said no. They weren't over it yet. It wasn't for another 67 years. It wasn't until 1939 that the churches actually rejoined each other. So we think, you know, the schism in the current Methodist Church is a big deal. It is, but it certainly wasn't the first. We've been here, seen this, done this before, sadly. Back to the schoolhouse. This is a picture of a Sunday school that Bill was able to find at the Virginia room. And according to what's written on the back, please, if you have photographs, family photographs, I'm going to insert this here, write on the back who it is, what it is. It's hugely helpful to your children, your grandchildren. I have a drawer full of photos at home. I sure would love to know who all those people are because I have no clue. But they must have been somebody important to my family because I have them. But on the back, it says possibly from Salem Church, which was another local church. And it's written on the back. There's a few people who they do know who the children are, and they have named them mostly Wenzel's, it seemed, on the back of that photograph. So in 1873, Reverend Clement organized the Sunday school at Herndon and at Jefferson Schoolhouse, according to the Methodist discipline. And as Bill pointed out, Mrs. Smith, we saw her her portrait a little bit ago. She was one of the school teachers. Her daughter, age 24, was one of the school teachers. Mary Catherine Poole, and we'll hear about her a little bit later too. She was all of 21 years old. She was a Sunday school teacher. She was the treasurer and was responsible for all of the Sunday school material. Can you imagine? 21 years old, and she takes on this whole responsibility. It's wonderful. And there was also Jenny Smith, who taught the 16 to 20-year-olds. Look how big that Sunday school is. Isn't that wonderful? I'm not quite sure who Jenny Smith is. I tried to figure out if she was related to Jesse and Lucina, but I didn't find any proof of that. She's not mentioned as a daughter in the histories, but maybe she was a sister. Given her birth dates, I think maybe she might have been his sister. Again, speculation, but they were the 4 Sunday school teachers. 1873 to 1874, Reverend Raymond Wren of the district office mentions the construction of Brown's Chapel, another local church, which was out here on Route 7 near Barron Cameron. And the pastors from our charge, even though we weren't in their charge, we were separate, but they provided pastors, we provided pastors to them sometimes for services. And this is one of the confusing things that Ms. Parrish, I'm sure, ran into. The dates are a little squirrely sometimes in the book. Her history says that the church was, that Brown's Chapel was founded in 1873, and they started talking about it in 1874 in the records, she says. But according to Reston Museum's website, it wasn't founded until 1879 when Augustus and Sarah Brown deeded a ½ acre of land to the Methodist Episcopal Church. I couldn't find deeds from that period to try to prove that date, but doesn't really matter. We know the church was founded, and it was moved in 1968. And it's now a rental facility. If you want a cute little church that, or somebody needs a church, or you know somebody, of course, ours is available too. But it is used now as a facility like that, available for rental. It's not a church anymore as such. In 1880, 81, our pastor was Reverend W.H. Forsyth. He was the father of John Forsyth, who had served the Liberty Meeting House immediately after the Civil War. So he was elderly when he got into the ministry, but he was the pastor, and I thought that was great family touch there. 1888 to 1889, the folks started talking, we need another church. We need a church somewhere closer. So they started making plans for a new church. They started having, the men started having meetings. Where are we going to build it? How are we going to fund it? Where are we going to get the money from? And where are we going to put it? We need some land. So women also played their part. Miss Anna Poole organized the Mite Society. And these are little guys in the church. They held festivals, they took collections, they made donations, they had all kinds of probably dinner on the ground and like fish fries, whatever, things like that. Anyway, some people made pledges of $1, some only $0.25, but it all added up. They also gave many speaking programs, so they were really talking up this new church. We need to found a new church, and the children could play their part. So Miss Parrish, and another little confusing thing in her book, she explains that, and I want to read it. Mrs. Grover Woods explained her mother's part by composing a short verse, and her 3-year-old son, Webster Bradford Jr., recited it. And here's the poem. Here I stand, a little man, to build a church I think is right, although I am a little mite. That's kind of a mouthful for a 3-year-old, I think. But if I started digging into this, the math, she goes on to say Webster Bradford Jr., who supposedly recited this at the age of 3, passed away at the age of 23 at the end of time for building. So the dates are a little squirrely, but when he died, the Mite Society donated $167.50. So I put these pictures in here because these folks are buried right out here. And in doing the math, here's Mrs. Grover Wood here on the right. Does that work? Yes, sort of. Mrs. Grover Wood is on the right. She was born 1888. Webster Bradford Jr., according to the tombstone, was born in 1876. So that makes a little more sense if he's 13 rather than 3 when he's reciting this poem up here in front of everybody. So maybe it was just kind of a typo or somebody. I think he was about 3 years old. No, he was 13. But he recited this, and then he died in 1899 at about the age of 23. So that works out a little better. And Mary E. Bradford was his mother, so she's also Mrs. Grover Wood's mother. She's also buried out here, 1848 to 1919. So that math works out a little better. But Mary E. Bradford wrote the poem, Webster recited it, and his sister told the story of how that all came to be. So there's Mary Bradford. She was the church treasurer for the Jefferson Schoolhouse and the beginning of Smith Chapel. So she came to church for a little while here, but she eventually went back and changed back to the Baptist faith, which she was actually raised in. So, but she's still buried out here in our church. And Webster passed away, like we said, at the age of 23 at the end of time for building. Again, that's a little more in line with the dates that we know for the actual building of this church. And the Mite Society did their part and collected the $167.50, which is pretty remarkable, I think. 1888 to 1889. Miss Parrish says, memories tell of Mrs. Mary Catherine Poole, the lady who was the Sunday school teacher, and Mrs. Sarah Farr. There's the Farr family again. They drove by horse and buggy. They heard that Mr. Jonah Cockrell had some land he was willing to sell, so they hitched up the buggy, and the two of those ladies went to talk to him and learned that he would sell land for the church. He was agreeable. They came back and notified the church officials. So this land is at the time known as North River Road. So right out here, there's this huge plot of land that is available, and I'm willing to sell it to you, Mr. Cockrell says. He had 1 1/2 acres, and he charged them $52.50 for the land. So that is a photograph of Joseph and Mary Wenzel. There's the Wenzel family again, Mary Wenzel Poole. Now, that is according to Miss Parrish's book. There's a lot of photographs in here, and she says that that is Joseph and Mary Poole. Joseph's father was one of the original trustees of the Sunday schools in the area. And he donated and felled a lot of the trees that helped build this church. She says that's Joseph and Mary Poole. The Virginia Room labels them as Jesse and Lucina Smith. But Bill and I looked at it, and we don't really think that's even a younger Jesse. So, again, disagreement, Mama said, Daddy said. But it's most likely, I think, having Miss Parrish having talked to the locals and gotten her photos and information from them, that whoever gave her that photo probably knew that it was the Pooles and not the Smiths. But Joseph and Mary were local. They got married in Washington, D.C. I found their marriage record. They got married in 1869 in Washington, D.C. And that, I believe, is their photo. So she helped spearhead this. We've got the land. It's available for $52.50. So come back next week and the Sunday after that, and we'll find out what they did with that $52.50 and how it got us here.